Hi everyone. So we've sort of got a sort of panel here, sort of representing a range of sort of areas of our community, and the two key things that we're sort of going to hope everyone can sort of take away from this session are what we as an RSE community can do as a whole to improve sort of visibility, recruitment, recognition, diversity, motivation, and career progression for folks already who are RSEs or who are sort of aspiring to be. But also what we can do ourselves as individuals, either as RSEs or sort of allies for others in the community to improve our own career potential and those of others around us. So we're going to start with a short intro. The panelists are going to introduce themselves. Then we've got a couple of sort of starter questions, but please do start adding your own, and we'll look to be kind of steered sort of by what you're interested in. So should we sort of, Martin, do you want to start? And we'll sort of go down. I think we've got sort of 4 mics between people. So
Testing, works. Hi everyone, I'm Martin Sharkey. I'm the founder and CEO of the company that's in a forum called Cloud Cubed. I've worked in industry for a long time, worked in lots of private sector organizations, and sort of stumbled into the world of RSE and academia when I held the role of CTO in Imperial College London. And we begun the journey on that. So really happy to be here, really happy to be supporting Martin and the Society for RSE and the convention.
Hello everyone, my name is Mahmoud Abdelrazak. I work in ARC, Advanced Research Computing at UCL. My job title is a little bit contentious. I'm a data consultant, but also a data steward, but also work with the RSEs, so maybe we'll talk about this. What I do usually is just working with databases and data pipelines, and my background is geology, databases, web development, real estate, multiple things, which I guess like similar to a lot of people in here. Yeah, and I'm really happy to be in here today. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Peter Hill. I'm a EPSRC RSE fellow from the last cohort. I had your sort of fairly typical entrance into RSE. I was a postdoc, doing physics, and then discovered this wonderful world of RSE and was like, oh yeah, that's me. And then worked as that for a bit, and then got this fellowship where I work on software sustainability in the plasma science. So you might have seen Liam's lightning talk in the previous thing. So yeah, I get to work on lots of fun stuff, sticking my fingers into lots of pies.
Hi everyone, I'm Fliss Guest. I'm Deputy Head of the Research Software Engineering Group at the University of Exeter. I'm also a Society Trustee. I joined the RSE community probably 3 years ago after the Exeter RSE group formed, after not enjoying my PhD, which a lot of you probably get. And yeah, I've loved it. I've loved kind of forming the culture of our team, and that's why I'm here to talk today.
Thanks. I'll use this one in case that doesn't work. Hi folks, so my name's Grace. I'm a program advisor in the Data for Science and Health team at Wellcome. That job title means nothing, but what I actually do is a mixture of kind of communications, learning, and influence type work. And I'm here, I suppose, mostly from a learning perspective to meet this community, learn from the work that you're doing, and also the challenges you're having around funding. And I'm looking forward to hearing from the panelists today as well. I should also say that I studied history. I'm not any sort of kind of software engineer, but I did study at Newcastle, and so it's very nice to be back.
So actually, I think one of our first audience questions is very aligned to one of the questions we were thinking of starting, so I'll try and merge them together. So I think, what do we think differentiates sort of RSE roles from maybe sort of IT professionals, sort of software engineers without the R, and from sort of researchers? Or maybe another way to look at it is sort of RSE roles in industry versus sort of academia, even if they include the R. So who wants to jump in on that?
Thank you. So my first sort of RSE role was actually a split RSE and IT support role. So I was doing like both at the same time. So, I'd be writing, intensive C++, HPC code, and then get interrupted to go fix the printer. And I think that's sort of, there are lots of commonalities between IT and RSE, but I thought that IT work was sort of more both reactive in that somebody's got a problem now, you have to go fix it, right? Like help desk sort of thing. And also proactive in that, okay, the servers, the group servers coming to the end of their life, they need sorting out. Like none of the researchers kind of care about that, but it needs doing. Whereas RSE work is more like collaborative in that I'm working a lot more alongside researchers to achieve their aims. And obviously, like, that's a really broad, crude split between the two things. And there's obviously a lot of overlap in some RSE stuff is reactive, some IT stuff is collaborative. But I thought that, for me, that was the sort of broad split between the two things, reactive versus collaborative.
Anyone else want to jump in on that?
I think the traditional academic progression role is that you start somewhere, you're doing your PhD, maybe you do a postdoc, and you start going all the way up the stairs to become maybe a professor, which is, if you're a student doing your undergrad, you can see this from when you're an undergrad. You can see all the professor, if you set your mind, this is what I want to be in, I don't know, 30 years or whatever, you know this from the start and you can see it very clearly. RSE, on the other hand, is sort of new in a way and is not very clear-cut as the academia. Academia in any university, there are professors and there are undergrad students, but not every single university in the world has rules that are defined for the RSE homogeneous with all the other universities. So it's a little bit difficult for people to come into this role and understand this is how I want my career to be progressed in whatever amount of time, which is a bit of a deterrent if you don't know, because not everyone would feel brave enough to actually jump into something that is ambiguous and able to progress in it and make their own way. Some universities have more defined rules now, which is great. I think we have a great progression track, but I don't think every university has this.
Martin, do you want to sort of jump in on maybe RSEs in industry versus RSEs in academia?
Yeah, because I guess for me, Martin, I've been spending my career building leverage teams, looking at efficiencies and optimization, rationalization across large-scale infrastructure. And when I first looked at how we could transform ICT and Imperial, we looked and said, right, we get these archetypes across the organization. Some of them are infrastructure specialists, some of them are storage, some of them are compute, some of them are software developers. But what we realized quite quickly was that in the research computing services, the RSE function was really there to enable the acceleration of research itself, separating that challenge that researchers had where they were trying to perform research but having to develop software skills at the same time, which encumbered their task. So separating that function out, professionalizing that function and enabling them to support the function of research was really important. So we recognize that within Cloud Cubed as well. And even when we're looking at the deployment of an Azure TRE, that platform is really there to accelerate the function of research, connect researchers to software, the software that they're familiar with, in a much accelerated time frame. And I think that there is a bleed over from academia into industry where we can look at how we can label even some of the technologists within our functions as RSEs. And it's really good to see the diversification of the archetypes even within the RSE community. We've looked at TRE specialists, we've looked at agile specialists, and it's really good to see that those are aligned with research now. So we can create almost like a sub-ecosystem below industry standards as well.
So I think there's been a few questions sort of coming in around sort of what career pathways are for different sort of shapes of folk. So I'll try and maybe sort of group a few of these into a couple of questions. So there's one on sort of what do we think so there's been a lot of work gone into career development for, let's say, quite generalist RSEs in sort of central teams. And maybe one thing as we sort of reflect on our 8th year of doing this conference and sort of 10 plus years of the community, the original motivating sort of situation was, here I am in a kind of postdoc shaped like job role, writing software as a sort of, I guess, an embedded RSE. And the thing we've mostly solved is the kind of central team sort of model. So I think this question's kind of saying, like, what about these other shapes? What about folks in smaller or domain-specific groups or embedded RSEs who don't have that same structural support? And maybe a related question, how much of a pathway is there in the profession as a whole for progression purely as a technical research technology professional, or do you always have to pick up some aspect of management? So there's, I guess, there's two sorts of tracks, outside of the main group, and as you progress, do you always have to go sort of managerial? Fliss, do you want to maybe start as someone running one of the groups?
I could see you looking at me, Martin. I was expecting it. Yeah, I think so. At Exeter, we're not as far ahead as maybe UCL in career progression, but what we're trying to do is bring in kind of criteria that align with an RSE role, similar to how academics have kind of in-role progression criteria. And what we're trying to do in that process is bring embedded RSEs into that. This isn't just going to be for us in the central team. This is something that we want to be used and applicable to everyone that kind of aligns with this role in some way. So I think we've been trying to kind of talk to as many embedded RSEs as possible and get their input on this. And it's something that, although hasn't formally been adopted by the university yet, we are going to start trialing. And I think we see how it goes. We'll see how kind of we get the feedback from people from the central team, but also the embedded team as well. There's a lot of overlap between, the skills, whether someone is sat in a kind of a domain-specific team or a central team. So I think we're trying to focus on the overlap and kind of facilitating progression via that. When it comes to progressing via a technical route as opposed to a managerial or a technical/managerial route, I think that's, in my mind, something that's a bit easier to deal with in a larger team. At the moment, we're at Exeter 15, we're growing quite quickly, but there's quite a few RSEs that we need to manage in some way and provide support to. And so for us, the senior role does have an element of managerial to it. It's something we want to introduce, a technical track, but I think for us, it's going to take a little bit of time for us to grow and kind of provide space for that. But it's definitely something that, we've seen work in other teams, and it's really important for people to be able to take whichever route they want, but also switch between those routes. It's not something that someone has to decide and then stick to. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that.
Peter, do you have a sort of experience from your embeddedness
so,
yourself?
As an embedded RSE, so I work like entirely within a research team, and there is a central RSE team at York, but I started long before that they came into being, and it took some time for that RSE track to get developed at York, but one got developed, but HR don't see RSE, they see basically just academic research and teaching roles, and then like technical roles. And on the technical side, it's, dead person's shoes sort of progression that you have to go to another job in order to progress. Whereas if you're on the ART side, then there's a standard like promotion track, but they'd see it all the same. So all the ART, there's the same promotion criteria for everybody, and it's just, okay, if you're a lecturer, you have to do sort of mix of everything. If you're just on research, you have to do just the research tick boxes. But, which is sort of good and bad, right? That, okay, there is a thing. I got promoted along it. I was the first RSE to get promoted along that at York. But because it's the same shaped whole, that means you have to fill in this enormous promotion document, which includes things like just list all of the books you've written, list all of the TV appearances, list all your radio shows that you've been on. And because it also includes like humanities, list all the performance works you've done. And nowhere does it say, list all the software you've written. So I had to just put in everywhere I could in this promotion document, be like, okay, I haven't choreographed any ballets, but I have written all this software, and that's practice-based research. So it was just, okay, this is the whole you've made for me, I will go through it. And it worked, but it's not ideal. But now that there's more recognition of it, okay, things are moving in the right direction. And then also your point about, can you be purely technical? And the answer is no. Along that track, you have to, it just explicitly says, you know, if you want to be grade 8, you have to have some managerial roles, which I don't think is ideal. But that's the way that it currently is, and I think that is a lot harder to change. But there is some kind of scope for what does that actually mean.
Martin, is the grass any greener in industry in terms of technical promotion, seniority?
Yeah, I think industries tackled this some time ago, because it was the case where if you wanted to get any kind of career progression, you had to naturally move into management. I get into IT, and I almost couldn't believe I got paid to do my job, because I'm a technologist through and through. I used to get out of bed and think, oh my God, I've got the dream job. I get paid for doing something that's a hobby. And I never wanted to manage people. I might be the CEO of a company, but I don't manage anyone in my business because I'm the worst manager in the world. I don't know how to manage people, but I know how to think technology-wise. I know how to solve really complex problems. And I'll give an example. Fujitsu, IBM, they have standard management tracks, and they've got distinguished engineer tracks. And that allows technologists to be exactly what they were designed to be, and also get the recognition. They get the distinguished engineer badge, which you could have within RSE as well. And we just need to iron out and smooth out the tracks, because people just aren't naturally managers. And you almost erode the value of some individual by making them conform to a certain standard. So I think we just need to be conscious of that. We solved it in industry to some degree, but I think we can also solve it within RSE.
So as a sort of quick follow-up to that, I did see a sort of there's this flutter of activity on my Twitter feed around sort of compensation negotiation time in the US every year, and I saw this discussion thread on staff, sort of plus engineer, and somebody who'd been doing the role a while said, yeah, you know, all these folks sort of talking about, you know, the tech track, sort of need to individual contributor track, sort of need to realize that it's sort of staff plus your individual contribution is going to meetings and sort of writing Word documents. Is your sort of experience that you can sort of actually stay hands-on on the code, sort of right up to that distinguished engineer level?
Yeah, and I mean, this is recognized because you do erode the value from an individual, and you also disenfranchise them, because if I had to manage people day and daily, I wouldn't want to come to work. And, you know, that removes the special energy that each of us brings into work. So, yeah, I mean, there is something about trying to not put people into certain holes, as you described a second ago. So we just need to be conscious of that. There is a way to solve it. We just need to plan for it.
So, Grace, I'm keen to bring you in from the funder side, but there's a couple of related sort of questions I wouldn't mind hitting first. So I think someone's mentioned dead person shoes already. So there's a sort of question about the bureaucracy around universities, I guess the organizational structures that are already there, that sort of have a lack of defined pathways that are a good fit for, you know, you're sort of trying to fit into this kind of IT track or this academic track, and this idea that to progress beyond a certain point, somebody's got to leave. I think we've already heard about how that might be different in the private sector, but there was, sorry, I'm just trying to find the sort of other one. Yeah, so, yeah, and you know, is this something that's sort of easier to do in sort of a, you know, a larger, I think Cliff, you've already sort of inferred it's easier to do in a larger group. So, yeah, so I guess thoughts on how we solve that sort of problem. Maybe Grace, do you want to sort of start sort of from the funder side of, like, are there things that you've been thinking of at Wellcome or you've been talking about with other funders on this kind of type of role that's not quite fitting on either the academic track or the sort of IT professional track, and how we sort of support the creation of kind of new pathways?
Yeah, thanks. I'm glad you didn't ask me detailed questions earlier about career progression, because I can't answer that, not coming from the background. But I think one of the things at Wellcome that we've been trying to think about or trying to do is fund. So historically, we've funded a lot of research software, actually, but we've done that through big kind of institutes and big grants. So through, you know, funding for EBI or Wellcome Sanger, and those kinds of institutes, but trying to change that and fund in different ways, and offer like lots of different types of funding that should therefore be attractive to people at different career stages and working in different fields. So we've recently supported or joined actually the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative and the Kavli Foundation on funding some kind of, it was actually a CZI program, but we kind of joined them to fund essential open source software for science, and that includes maintenance grants. So trying to do things a little bit differently to how we have historically done them, and hopefully that also signals like a strong intention from funders to fund folks at different stages. Another example actually is a colleague of mine worked on or has been working on like what we're calling data prizes, and so and they're a kind of a model where you have like a prototyping phase and then an alpha phase and then a beta phase, and they're kind of like a prize model. But we found that we've been able to support through that kind of multidisciplinary teams where we've asked the teams to make sure that they've got kind of like research software engineers or software developers as an equal part of that team. And that's also been really powerful, I think, for bringing in folks who are maybe and having folks' names on like big grants that historically maybe wouldn't be able to. So trying to test different things, but we've still got a lot to learn, I would say.
So there's a couple of very interesting questions I'd want to make sure we get to about do we just burn the whole system down? But before we get to that, I think there's a sort of a quite nice specific one about someone's observed that they're seeing a lot of fixed-term contracts coming up for RSEs, and one of the things we were trying to do when we set this community up was figure out what does it mean to sustain these career pathways without the classic publish or perish model. So do we think that is there a danger that we're sort of like drifting back into postdoc territory? Is this a problem that is this just a sort of temporary thing? Do we are we those of you in central groups, is permanent long-term the norm, or are you under increasing pressure to kind of go with some shorter-term contracts?
I feel like you're looking at me again, Martin.
Well, also Mahmoud is in the UCL group, and maybe when you jump in, you could also make some observations, Mahmoud, on sort of what's different, what's different and the same across the different professions. So I don't mind which way round you go first.
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, I think we are committed to the long-term contracts. We make a point of not hiring anyone on a fixed-term contract. I think it's not easy to kind of ensure that's the case, but I think that's where we are at the moment. And I've not necessarily seen a massive explosion in them, but I think if people are seeing that, then yeah, we need to be careful about that.
I'm going to come at this from a point of view of an employee. I don't lead the group, right? I don't need to worry myself about securing a position for someone else. I was just handed the position. But, well, thank you. Well, yeah, so one of the things that some people, I think, already know about this, when I applied for the job, I didn't even know what is permanent versus fixed term. I just thought it's a better job, and it is. But the thing is, when it comes to permanent positions, is that it ties into the progression in the sense of, if you think about academia again, there are a level of abstractions that you can look at the CV of someone and see they are at that particular level in their career. You can see if they have masters, PhDs, they published that, they did this postdoc. It's much harder to look at the CV of an RSE and decide where they're at, because one of the things about working in computing specifically, and please do come talk to me if you disagree, is that the levels, again, of abstractions of working with the machine, that you do not need to understand every single level of like very low level code or how the operating system itself works. You could just work with Python and be very good at that and be a senior engineer in that. In many of the other sciences, if you don't understand, like for geology, if you don't understand what rocks are, you're not going to understand the advanced theories. You're not going to understand plate tectonics. So in computing, we have the advantage of being able to come at one level of abstraction and just be good in that one and live your life on that one, and you don't need to jump in all other levels. The impact of this in your CV is that it's a little bit harder for people to understand where did you come on the level of abstraction here? Like where did you jump on just Python, or did you like work with C first, or how did this work, right? And the problem with that is that when you apply, if you worked on a fixed term contract for a while and then you want to apply for another one, it's really hard to see where you sit. It's really hard to rank people unless you are very much aware of that particular field that they work on, the specialization that they worked in. So I think the advantage of working in a permanent job, other than the security and all of that, is that you can see the progression that people make. They start working on this one field and then they grow in it. And then after a while, because they have worked in the same place, you know where they started and you know where they ended. And it's much easier to assess the skills that they have and help them progress in their career. So.
Cool. And just on the Turing side, we're also very committed to sort of long-term jobs, and it does, permanent jobs, and it does add some constraints in that you can't surge higher, like when demand exceeds supply. You've got to kind of ensure that longer-term sort of thing's there. But yeah, I think that is something we as a community should sort of keep an eye on. So I'm just trying to make sure that I'm keeping track of time. So there's our most sort of voted question, which I think leads nicely into the shall we burn it all down ones. So are there different RSE skills that are needed at different career levels? So for example, are there skills which aren't important initially, but are essential, as you grow in seniority? And I think maybe if we can think both in terms of, let's say, the management track and the distinguished engineer track, sort of as we think about those. Who wants to come in sort of first on that one? Yes, please.
Okay, I'd say the essential skill that an RSE coming into the RSE role is to understand that they can be an RSE to begin with, because a lot of the researchers come into this, I guess, sorry, by show of hand, how many people here have computer science background? Okay, I mean, look around you, all the other people who have not raised their hands, they didn't start as a software engineer. They didn't have this as their CV. They had to learn this outside the curriculum that they have been taught. So just to know first that you are a person who can be an RSE is the first important thing. And this is just my input to this.
Well, who else wants to jump in?
I guess there's something to be said about like cleverness, right? That, okay, this may be a bit of a cliche that you start off and you're learning stuff and you get something working, you're like, great. And then you learn how you can make this really clever, and then it becomes this really complex thing that nobody else can understand. And then you get further on, you're like, hang on, let's just keep this stupid and simple. And I think there's something to be said for that, of learning how to write the best code most simply, like with the most parsimonious amount of abstractions, right? The fewest number of abstractions that you actually need, like Occam's razor, but for like actually writing code, because the thing that you learn as you gain skill is it's not the writing code, it's the reading of code, right? That other people are going to have to read this. Who cares that the computer can read it and work it out and does stuff? Like, that's going to happen. But you're actually writing for other people. And I think that takes a long time to actually like bed in and understand, first and foremost, I'm not writing this for the computer, I'm writing this for other people. And then everything that entails.
I think just picking up on the reading of code, as you become more senior, in some cases you start to write less code yourself and you read a lot more code. You have to jump in when people need help, or when there's a gap and someone needs to fill it. And I think being able to adapt and be as flexible as possible, and that comes along with reading the code is really important from my perspective.
Martin?
Yeah, I guess I'm looking at this from an industry and commercial perspective, and we talked about people being clever and building the highly customized version of the code that's not configurable, which doesn't make it repurposeful or reusable. And I guess if we look at the principles in the community, is that what we're trying to achieve? You know, we've created this common society with common interests. We're trying to build something, I guess, that's shareable, and that would include code. So the more clever we get, the less shareable that code is. And yes, granted that it gets to a certain point and it's very specific to the research project, but there are ways to modularize things that we build that can be reused within the community, that we can use our GitHub repos to be able to store and check in code and look at how we leverage that to accelerate some of the science-based projects that we deliver. So, we just had a conversation about this out in the foyer about how sometimes you get put under lots of pressure to go and develop fixes and patches and address bugs, but sometimes if you get to go back and make it reusable and shareable, sometimes we hard code images and logos and this stuff where we could actually have thought about that a little bit differently and said maybe what we do is we build the ability for us to drop a logo in, and all we need to do is figure out what the dimensions of that logo are and make it customizable. So we had this principle where we had configuration over customization. And I think living and breathing by that addresses lots of future technical debt, and that's a problem that's endemic in all of IT, irrespective of which discipline you work in.
I'm super keen to get to the burning it all down questions, and we've got sort of 10 minutes left. But there's a couple of observations from the audience that also sort of resonate with some things that sort of popped into my mind on this. I think as you sort of progress, as regardless of whether you're on the management or the kind of technical track, that there's that there's an observation from someone from the audience that there's a difference between sort of leadership and management, and I think that's sort of very true. One of the things we sort of talk about at the Turing is that while management might be something that we can sort of keep optional and we can have a range of sort of what that looks like. There's at some point as you get to the senior level and above, you need to stop sort of force multiplying the team. It's not just about your own sort of work. And I think so there's a really good observation that there's sort of a wide range of leadership that people can do. It's not just about leading people, it's not just about leading projects. And even there's a difference between sort of, owning a project technically and perhaps, some of the work might feel like management, but it's very tightly coupled to, to the technical responsibilities you have. And there's also, as we were seeing this week, community management and many sort of other ways to sort of have leadership. So I think something for us all to take away is some thoughts on like how do we make sure that in our organisations and in our wider community that we sort of value all those different types of leadership. And another observation that might be good for people to look up is this engineering sort of pendulum, which I think came up a bit earlier today of you spend some time in management, but you swing back to technical. Maybe a quick question to the panelists, is that something that people have seen in their organizations or other organizations they've worked at? At least one member of the audience has experienced that transition themselves. Is that something that we currently support or could support?
Just really quickly, yeah, like this, I mean, academics do this, right? They go on sabbaticals and then they take a year off and they write a new code, right? Like that's the thing that can happen. Like even if you are in that pigeonhole, you can do that. I mean, not all the time, obviously, but like it's like you said, a pendulum, right? Swings back and forth.
Cool. Anyone else want to jump in on that before we get to burning down the house? Okay, so...
No, I was just going to say, it's a really hot topic, Martin, so management versus leadership. It's really interesting because everyone can be a leader, but not everyone can be a manager, and vice versa. And sometimes it's really good to see people taking responsibility and accountability within a project that they're managing and demonstrating leadership. It is something that you exhibit, that you demonstrate, and I try and encourage being able to diversify your experience by moving through the organization, picking up things, understanding the pressures that people are under, because only by understanding the pressures that people are under, that the constraints that they've got, and how the project works. Can you understand what the complexity of that is, and maybe demonstrate leadership to be able to pull them out of a hole every so often? So it's something I definitely encourage within my business, and I've worked in some multi-hundred-million-pound programs in central government in the UK in leadership roles, and they're really, really complex initiatives, and sometimes it's really good to see the bright stars shining, taking that leadership and accountability within them and just trying to encourage it.
I think this is probably our last set of questions, and so it might be a good one to end on. If we get through them a bit quicker, there might be another one we can pick up, but there's so, we've got this kind of central model that seems to be working sort of well. We're struggling a bit about folks who are more embedded in the academic system. So there's a couple of related questions here. Should we've got something like half a dozen, 6 to 8 professors of RSE now. Is this a sign of success and acceptance, or are we bending ourselves too hard to fit into the current kind of reward framework? And is this just us sort of leaning into the kind of broken academic credit system? Should we sort of be forging a pathway for embedded RSEs that doesn't require that? And sort of related to that, can we make this sort of progress happen within the existing system, or do we need a more radical reform of kind of academia set up before we can get proper sort of career progression for this? And I think maybe something to reflect on is what that postdoc experience is even for researchers. It's not sort of great. What are people's thoughts on that?
Join a union. Right? Like individually, it's really hard to make any progress, but together, we can make a lot more progress, arm in arm. Like, join a union.
Well, I'll give you an industry perspective on it. So I'm looking at the RSE community within a growing platform that we got within Cloud Cubed, and I'm thinking I would like to put an RSE hat in some of my individuals, but equally I would like to see how we could create some kind of vehicle that maybe represents a number of strands, and it could be that we create a master's program. So, speaking already to the likes of Aston University about being able to certify something, looking at social mobility, and Martin, you and I talked about this when we met in the Turing Institute, because sometimes RSE is going to be inaccessible for people who are just ordinary, who want to move from other skilled workforce backgrounds. Maybe they're a labourer, or they're a plasterer, they want to look at software development skills. And maybe there's a career pathway that we can work within the RSE community and with other industry or academic institutes to certify, but maybe not make it a hard slog where you've got 3 years before you get a certificate. Maybe there's an accessible way that encourages people to be more engaged, like they get a 6-month certification or award through Aston, and maybe there's other kind of mentorship awards that they get through that progression. We actually didn't get to the social last night because we spent the rest of the time in 360 speaking about this exact topic and how we could enable this within the US, but how we could use a UK institute to be able to certify a program. So there's something in that, and I think we should probably explore it a little bit further. And myself and Professor Sandhu from Imperial, we're going to have a look at speaking with UKRI about how we can access funding around it.
So I think something that hasn't come up very, in the Q&A here, but has in lots of other discussions is, how do we support folks into the profession, either early career or sideways from sort of other shapes of roles? So Grace, any thoughts on, in terms of conversations people have had forward-looking from the sort of funder model of, what alternate, things you could support, or maybe this kind of access, how do we support people to make that transition into some of these, roles within academia that have analogues outside, but there's that kind of translation gap?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point, and something that we're also conscious of as a funder is like, how do we provide more and better substantial opportunities for research software engineers so that we don't lose them to tech companies, et cetera, et cetera. And I think, well, there's a few things that it's probably, I think the main thing that we're trying to do is offer grants or and support across different scales, so like from smaller grants, which Wellcome hasn't historically been very good at doing, but we know can be really important, particularly for like trying something out, testing something out, maybe it will fail. Like having that as an option within grants that we have. So the example I had before about the data prizes, like there was a bunch of things we supported for like, I don't know, 6 months. There were small grants, but it meant that like teams that wouldn't otherwise work together got an opportunity to like test something. Some of them didn't go anywhere, but that's fine, that's great, like that's been an option. But then through to bigger, like the other thing that I also wanted to pick up on actually, that around like longevity, sorry I'm slightly jumping around, but is like trying to have much longer grants for software. So we did an open call for climate-sensitive infectious disease modeling tools, and those are 5-year grants. I think the longest one I've seen for something software-wise is 8 years, with like a bit of a period at the end for sustainability thinking. So that's baked into the grant. But having that, as well as having those smaller, shorter grants, to kind of entice folks in that like maybe wouldn't be going for one of those bigger ones. So I think for us, it's about thinking across those different scales and trying to do that. And for us, sometimes that means working with other funders that are better at doing the other scales than we are. So I think it's also a bit about collaborating.
Anyone want to jump in? Yeah.
Yeah, so like one way to change things is to have more autonomy and to be able to do the things that you want to do. And so that there are funding opportunities that you yourself can go get, right? Various fellowships, so like SSI fellowships. There's COSEC fellowships, the STFC COSEC, which I think have just closed, so you might have been too late on that. And then the UKRI, they Open Plus fellowships now, they're called, where it's like a normal sort of academic fellowship, but you can have more time for community-based stuff. So the RSE fellowship scheme is now closed, and they've kind of rolled it into this Open Plus scheme. So if you want to get autonomy for yourself to do what you want to do, go seek out these funding opportunities, and then you can help define like what this career looks like.
And I think final word from Mahmoud.
Yeah, sure. So I think what we're discussing here is a social change in a way. Like if you think about the university as a community, any social change that happens in a society doesn't just happen because one person wanted it to happen or like one organization wanted it to happen. It works best if there are multiple people trying, or multiple organizations trying different attributes to it. So a professor being like an RSE professor, that's great. A union is great. If you try to apply for something yourself, that's great. And then slowly you see the framework. It's not just the rules, that the framework, that what's accepted in the minds of the people, that an RSE would be in a leadership position in the university, will change once they see this happening, once they see that one person have been able to make this, and then we'll just, all of us will be able to walk through, you know, a human-shaped hole in the wall.
Well, thank you very much for the panel. There were 2 excellent questions. It was difficult to get to, but we'll try and sort of pick those up. But I think we'd build on that around, can we make a common framework, and can that support all these different sort of pathways through? But let's save that for coffee. Just like to thank the panel again for a really interesting conversation. And thanks very much for all the amazing questions. So give yourselves a round of applause as well.